Recently, I purchased a 1995 Mitsubishi Lancer GLXI coupe. It's a cheap little runaround A to B car, but it does have a few little issues, so let's take a look at the cheap car that I bought. Here is the little silver two-door, which doesn't look all that bad, until you get a bit closer. The clear coat has mostly peeled off the bonnet, and the roof has suffered significant hail damage and has many unsightly rust patches, perhaps not entirely caused by the hail damage, and I've seen similar aged Mitsubishis with rust problems with their roofs. And thankfully, most of the bodywork around the sides of the car appears to be damage-free. Even the front bumper looks pretty good, somewhat sporty even. And around the back, we've got a little spoiler and the GLXI badge, meaning this has power steering and an AC. In the boot, there's a second spare tire for some reason, and I guess I'll have to dispose of that somewhere. The interior is boring and very original, both things I consider to be good. Even the driver's seat, aside from some tears on the side, it still looks pretty neat. And if you want to get into the back seats, you have to move the front passenger seat forward. And what about under the hood though? This car features a 1.8 litre 4-cylinder engine delivering a maximum of 84 kilowatts of power. The rocker cover and gasket were apparently changed somewhat recently, hence it looks shinier than most of the engine. The engine coolant looks to be at a good level and is green in color, definitely something you want to see. And it's not due for an oil change for just under 10,000 kilometers, implying it was changed somewhat recently, and checking the oil level and color, I'd believe that. The major 180,000 kilometer logbook service has been done within the last 85,000 kilometers, including the timing belt, spark plugs, and brake fluid. So mechanically, this 28-year-old car should be pretty reliable with very little need for repairs. With the roof cleaned off, I began by sanding back the rust patches and problemed areas. There are definitely better ways of doing this, but the paint overall is horrible on this car, so it would not be worth spending money or a heap of time fixing. Once the compromised areas of the paint were sanded back, I applied some rust converter to seal them, and this should stop them at the very least rusting further. Once again, this is a beta car that isn't worth spending much time on the paint. A cheap and quick method like this will improve the look slightly and stop the awful rust spots from getting much worse. Now, the rest of the car's body can get a much needed wipe down. Cleaning the inside of the glass was vital, as in direct sunlight I couldn't even see out of the front window, and some lens cleaner and a microfiber cloth worked really well. And today's video wouldn't be possible without Wondershare and their Recover It data recovery software. If you've got data that's become corrupt, lost, or damaged due to virus attacks or from a crashed computer, Recover It allows you to scan and preview files for free. No data, no charge. The first step is to use the link in the description to download Recover It, select your operating system, and once you've installed the program, choose your affected drive. This SD card, even though it was technically wiped clean, all of the video files were detected and able to be recovered. Recover It supports over 1,000 file formats across an array of file systems. You can even recover files from BitLocker encrypted drives and T2 chip enabled Macs, and scan the files you actually need faster by eliminating file types that aren't relevant, or do a deep scan by selecting every file type possible. And some advanced features include NAS as well as remote Linux data recovery. You can recover data remotely from failed or logically corrupt NAS storage drives without even having to unplug them from your network. Files damaged due to corruption or being overwritten could even be somewhat repaired. And if you've got data that's in need of recovering, definitely consider Recover It. Links are in the description if you want to know more. The next day, I painted over the rust converter with some random silver spray paint I had lying around, and you could always purchase touch-up paint that matches your existing paint, but for this car it doesn't really matter, and apart from some of the rust stains, it looked okay. And while the paint dries, I'll tend to a few other things, like this clip for the boot release mechanism, which was close to being severed since it wasn't clipped in place properly, and the loose key barrel I simply glued down with some superglue. One thing I have to spend money on are some new rear tires, which are on the tread wear indicator. Being small 13-inch rims, the two new tires were only $69 each fitted and balanced. Nice. The fronts were rotated to the back and the new ones were put on the front. The extra spare in the boot was also disposed of by the tire place. After a quick clean and polish, the rust stains along the roof were nearly all but gone. An improvement from the original roof condition, that's for sure. And since this car has been sitting in the same spot for a few days, I thought it would be a good idea to check for any oil stains on the ground, and there weren't any. So I think it's time to see how this car drives, and yes, I was wearing a bike helmet to get this first-person perspective. Even though I'm quite tall and wearing a helmet, there was somehow still headroom in this tiny car. I made sure that my seatbelt was on, 104.7 Triple M was on the radio, and the AC was on and cold. It started very easily, and there were no warning lights illuminated once the car was running, thankfully. Handbrake off, auto trans in drive, and we're off. It's no race car, not fast, but it gets around quietly. The suspension is pretty soft, making for a very comfortable ride, and the steering inputs were also super easy, with the power steering making turning the wheel as easy as cutting through butter. Some of the base model GL Lancers didn't even have power steering from what I understand, and with a curb weight of just under 1,000 kilograms, not only is it a very small car, but it is a light one. Lancers of this vintage can be pretty cheap right now, and it's important to find one with a good maintained engine. Most of them will have cosmetic defects, but that really doesn't matter as long as the engine's strong. So what are some good things to look out for when buying a cheap A to B car? First of all, if the car has one, the timing belt. These are good for up to around 10 years or around 120,000 kilometers. If it's older than that or overdue with kilometers, it'll need replacing, and this can cost several $100s unless you want to try doing it yourself. The next thing is the coolant system. Is it green or red, and is it at a good level? If it's orange, it may be filled with sediment and gunk, just like the Ford Falcon I made a video on recently. Do all the dash lights illuminate when the ignition is turned on? This is vital to make sure the car's warning systems will indeed alert you when a problem arises. And once again, check the oil level when the engine is cold and on a level surface. It should have an amber hue to it and be close to or right on the full level indicator. And be sure to also check the transmission fluid as well. This must be done while the engine and the transmission are hot after driving, so be careful when reaching for the dipstick. This Lancer had a red color to the oil, which is ideal, and the level was perfect. On a cold start, the exhaust shouldn't be bellowing out smoke. If it is, that's a sign of failing gaskets inside the engine or a coolant leak. The Lancer thankfully didn't exhibit any of those problems. Be sure to check the lights and turn signals as well, and if they aren't working, that could be an electrical fault or globes that need replacing. Making sure that there's water in the wiper tank, also try the squirters, which also seem to be good on the Lancer. Next up, while the car is running, blast the AC and it should very quickly get nice and cold. And when the engine is warmed up, blast the heaters as well, and if it doesn't get hot, this could mean that there is a problem with the heater core, heater valve, or a more serious underlying coolant system problem. When accelerating, the transmission should change gears smoothly and without hesitation. Also, listen out for any misfires or unusual noises. When braking, make sure that there is no shuddering, and if there is any squeaking, that could mean the brake pads or rotors need attention. Whether it's an auto or a manual, be sure that it can engage the reverse gear without issues as well. This cheap little runaround passed all of those tests, and if you're on a tight budget or don't have the ability to fix them yourselves, they could become a money pit very quickly, and cars like this have to be maintained, and at 28 years old, yes, this car is 28 years old, will be lacking in modern safety features. There are no airbags at all, which wasn't uncommon for a cheaper vehicle released in 1995. And when it comes to crumple zones, this thing will likely fold up like the lid of a sardine can in the event of a serious accident. And those are simply some of the trade-offs you've got to make when buying an older, dirt cheap car. But at least you can take the head unit's faceplate off so that no one will steal your stereo. Remember when people were desperate enough to do that? But the simplicity and lack of electronic features does make this car very simple to work on, and there's without a doubt less to go wrong. While this is indeed a small car, you can definitely still fit a lot of stuff in it. You might remember that e-bike I did a video on a few weeks ago. Well, I actually managed to fit it in the back seat of this car. And one thing I did notice near the end of filming was a few drops of oil from the car. And after working out where the slight drip was coming from, I collected it, and after 24 hours there was literally at most 2 to 3 mils of oil, and half the time it wouldn't drip any at all. And I'd be surprised if any car that's approaching 30 years old wasn't leaking a tiny bit here and there. Either way, it's such a small amount that you wouldn't even notice a drop in oil level between service intervals, and you could always just top it up yourself. So what is a cheap little car like this good for? Many people would probably say food delivery. This didn't go so well. Perhaps this would make for a good taxi. It seemed easy enough, I just made the signs myself, but for some reason no one wanted to be picked up, and it turns out there are these things called laws and regulations. Either way, I'd had my fun with the car, and before selling it on, what better place to go to than the king himself. But like a peasant, I had to do the cleaning myself, which I do like doing. I would recommend this over an automatic car wash, as you're in control, there's less chance of damaging your car, and it was also cheaper. Not only did one of the car wash employees recognize the car from the ad I'd posted, but the previous owner was complaining about the guy who bought it off of him and haggled him down to only 600 Australian dollars. But that's what you get for letting the car go so cheap. You didn't have to sell it to him. And I guess that means the story the guy I bought it from told me about his brother using it for food delivery was complete bullshit, as he would have had it for a very short time before flipping it for more than double what he paid. And finally, I gave the knobs and surfaces a wipe down with some eucalyptus oil. And I sold it for just what it owed me, no more. And I hope the learner driver who purchased it gets good use out of it. But they did drive it off with the handbrake engaged during the test drive, so best luck to him. So there we have it, a fairly robust and reliable little automatic car. Anyway, thanks for watching, I hope you've enjoyed this car video, and I'll see you in the next one.